Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, June 2nd, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: debt ceiling deal puts no limit on Ukraine aid. So, the debt ceiling agreement that was reached between the White House and House Republicans places no constraints on spending on the war in Ukraine. And a White House official told this to Bloomberg. So, the $113 billion that has been authorized to spend on the war in Ukraine so far was passed as supplemental emergency funds, which is exempt from the spending caps that are part of the debt ceiling deal. So, according to the Congressional Budget Office, funding designated as an emergency requirement or for overseas contingency operations would not be constrained, and certain other funding would not be subject to the caps. So the deal suspends the nation's debt limit through January 1st, 2025. Hawks in Congress are looking to use this emergency spending to increase the $886 billion military budget that was agreed to as part of the deal. So the 886 billion, that's what Biden requested for 2024. So the Republicans did not seek any cuts in military spending. The emergency funds could go beyond Ukraine and they might be used to send weapons to Taiwan or for spending net hawks, any spending basically that they could justify as being used as part of their strategy against China. So there's a quote from Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's a Democrat from Connecticut. He said, quote, "We are almost certainly going to need a supplemental for Ukraine, which is, in my own view, one of the most pressing defense challenges that we have right now. And the other obligations flow from China and Taiwan," end quote. There's been talk for a while now about using this emergency supplemental funding to send more weapons to Taiwan. And now I'm sure that they're going to be more motivated to do it, that they're not going to get their huge military. Well, it is a huge military budget, but Biden requested 886 billion, and Republican hawks said it was not enough. They plan to add tens of billions of dollars to it. So now it just seems like they're going to take advantage of this emergency funding. And other senators are saying that they're going to use this supplemental funding to raise military spending altogether. They're not even just talking about Ukraine or Taiwan. Mitt Romney said, quote, "Clearly our support for Ukraine will be outside the budget as it has been in the past, but I'd like to see additional support for our own military in emergency supplementals as well," end quote. Lindsey Graham, he said he's planning to introduce an amendment to this debt ceiling agreement that would lift the military spending caps altogether, so raise that $886 billion budget. I don't know if he's going to have much success there, and if that doesn't work, he's going to be pushing for the lots of emergency funding. So it just goes to show that this whole thing was just a political show, basically. It doesn't really mean anything. They could just spend whatever they want. And so the debt ceiling deal, the legislation is known as the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023. Usually the name of the bill is the opposite of what it does. But the House passed it on Wednesday night in a vote of 314 to 117. And a few Republicans who have been good on Ukraine voted in favor of this deal, including Massey and Green, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So, it's just disappointing to see that. And the Senate is expected to vote on the bill soon. The deadline is June 5th. They were, discussing it, I know, on Thursday, but we'll probably see a vote soon. And they're all saying, don't worry, we got this emergency funding. We'll still be able to pour weapons into Ukraine and Taiwan too while we're at it. All right, the next one here: weapons firm CEO celebrates defense increase in debt ceiling. So this is from Responsible Statecraft from Eli Clifton. And basically, it just quotes the CEO of Lockheed Martin, which is the biggest arms maker in the entire world, saying that this debt ceiling agreement, the military budget, $886 billion, that's about as good as we could have gotten it. He said, We don't really have to worry. Everything's going to work out for us. The way he put it, uh, he said it's a good outcome for the arms industry and the best that Lockheed Martin could ask for at this point. So he's very happy about it. And Lockheed Martin, again, the biggest defense, they're making so much money, with this Ukraine policy, just flooding weapons. A lot of the weapons that are being sent, the big ones are made by Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. They're the two big heavy hitters. So, of course, they're celebrating this deal that just means, it's essentially unlimited military spending if they could do these emergency supplemental things. So, everything's working out good for Lockheed Martin. All right, the next one here. Russia says that it repelled another cross-border raid. So this didn't get much attention, but it seems like it was just about as big of an attack on Russia's Belgorod region, which borders Ukraine, as we saw last week. It was last Monday. So it's been within 2 weeks that we've seen two big attacks on Belgorod. So Russia said that its forces repelled a cross-border attack on Thursday. Russia's defense ministry claimed that they eliminated over 30 Ukrainian terrorists in the attempted attack on the town of Shepakino, which is about 4 miles. It's only 4 miles from the Ukrainian border, so it's very close. And 8 civilians on the Russian side were injured. Russia evacuated some civilians from the area. 2 groups of Russian volunteers, it's the same groups that took credit for the other Belgorod attack, the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion. They took credit again for this attack. And, I just point out the Russian Volunteer Corps is an openly neo-Nazi group. Their members are open neo-Nazis. It's no secret. And their leader is a well-known white nationalist. So, and this is, so these are the people that have been attacking Russia. And he previously told Financial Times that his fighters used American armored vehicles in the May 22nd raid. So that was the last raid on Belgorod. And they had, again, American armored vehicles. And because of that, it prompted the U.S. to reiterate to Ukraine not to use U.S. weapons on Russian territory, although that restriction doesn't apply to Crimea, as Sullivan recently reaffirmed. There hasn't been any sign yet that the attack on Thursday was carried out with U.S. weapons. I haven't seen anything surface saying that. Again, this didn't receive nearly as much attention as the last one. Russia's defense ministry said that that Belgorod was shelled on Thursday with Grad multiple launch rocket systems. That is a Soviet-era system. And Moscow said the attackers were supported by tanks and other vehicles, but they did not specify what kind. They didn't say if they were NATO equipment. So U.S. weapons being used on Russian territory, of course, risks a major escalation of the war. Interestingly, the White House is recognizing that. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, he said on Wednesday that President Biden's opposition to signing off on U.S. arms being used on Russia is rooted in his desire to avoid World War III, which is all well and good. But again, it doesn't apply to Crimea, which to Russia, it's just, that's Russian territory. And, there's all these signs that Ukraine is going to use American weapons on Russian territory if they get the chance. So that's what we're risking. At least, the White House is acknowledging that this does risk World War III. And that's what they are risking by pursuing this policy of, giving Ukraine everything it wants, all these weapons. It's risking a direct war between the U.S. and Russia. All right. So the next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute. The U.S. sets countermeasures to Russian suspension of the New START treaty. So the New START treaty is the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia. Russia said that it suspended its participation in the treaty, but they are still abiding by the limits. So the New START limits the deployment of nuclear warheads and launchers, bombers, submarine missiles, and ICBMs. So Russia's still abiding by those limits. The U.S. is still abiding by those limits, but they're not doing inspections. And that's basically what the U.S. announced today, is that they're taking 4 countermeasures in response to Russia's ongoing violations of the New START treaty. The most significant decision by the Biden administration is preventing Russian inspectors from visiting U.S. territory, but inspections have been suspended since 2020. They were suspended due to COVID, and they never restarted them just because of the situation of U.S.-Russia relations. A second countermeasure involves limiting information sharing about the nuclear arsenal. The U.S. will additionally withhold data from Russia about future missile tests. So this is not good. Just the broken, arms control treaties have just completely broken down. And I mean, there's just no sign. I just can't imagine any time in the near future that they're going to resolve this, that they're going to work this out. And if you see the picture Kyle put in here, it's Medvedev, the former Russian president, shaking hands with Barack Obama because they were the ones that signed New START back in 2011. I forget which year, but you see everything Medvedev is saying now and just the state of U.S.-Russia relations. All right, the next one here, another one from Kyle. The State Department says that the Pentagon is preventing cooperation with the ICC. That's the International Criminal Court. A State Department official told Congress that the Pentagon is preventing the U.S. government from working with the International Criminal Court to prosecute Russians for the invasion of Ukraine. And that is because, we saw a report about this in the New York Times not that long ago that said the Pentagon was blocking this because they're worried that, if they set this precedent of the ICC investigating and trying to convict non-party members, that they could turn around and do this to the U.S. And the U.S. has a history of not cooperating with the ICC and taking action against them. During the Trump administration, the U.S. sanctioned the ICC because they were investigating American and Israeli war crimes. Really, that was over the U.S. War crimes in Afghanistan. And the Biden administration came in. They reversed those sanctions, but they basically pressured the ICC into not doing the investigation in Afghanistan. They basically stopped it. And now with Israel as well, the Biden administration said very strongly back in 2021 that the ICC should not investigate Israel. They're not a member state. They have no jurisdiction. But now here they are trying to use the ICC to its benefit to go after Russia. And the Pentagon is hesitant to go along, I think, because they understand the precedent that might be set here. All right. So the next one here, SpaceX gets a Pentagon contract for Starlink. So the Pentagon said Thursday that it's awarded a contract to Elon Musk's SpaceX to ship Starlink satellite internet terminals to Ukraine. So the Pentagon announced this, and they refused to share any details. They didn't say, how many of these terminals we're going to be buying from SpaceX, how much the contract is worth. They didn't reveal any of those details. So SpaceX began shipping thousands of Starlink terminals to Ukraine basically right after Russia invaded. And the internet service is said to have been vital for Ukraine's war effort, both for communication and helping with targeting. Earlier this year, the president of SpaceX, Gwen Shotwell, she said that the Starlink terminals were never meant to be weaponized, referring to reports of Ukraine using Starlink to acquire targeting data with drones. She said that SpaceX took steps to limit Ukraine's ability to use the internet service in that way. I'm not sure exactly what that means or if they really did that, but it's still very vital for Ukraine to use for communication purposes, and especially as Russia has been bombing their infrastructure. So when SpaceX was initially delivering those Starlinks, they were doing so in cooperation with the U.S. Agency for International Development. That's the USAID. Last fall, Elon Musk said that SpaceX could not continue paying for the service for Ukraine and asked the Pentagon to foot the bill. As of October 2022, SpaceX donated 20,000 terminals to Ukraine. Musk said at the time that it cost his company $80 million and that it would exceed $100 million by the end of that year. So it looks like he got what he wanted, that the Pentagon The U.S. taxpayers are going to be footing the bill for this, but we don't know how much because the Pentagon isn't saying so. All right, the next one here: anti-tank weapons sent to Ukraine seen in the hands of a Mexican cartel. So Mexican TV has reported that a militant affiliated with Mexico's Gulf Cartel was spotted carrying an advanced rocket launcher, and it's the same type that the U.S. has shipped thousands of to Ukraine. So this was a report on Milenio TV, and they initially identified the rocket launcher as a Raytheon-made Javelin anti-tank missile system. The U.S. has been providing these to Ukraine since 2018. Trump signed off on the delivery in 2017. It's the first, type of missile system that the U.S. gave to Ukraine. And since the invasion, the U.S. has sent over 10,000 of these launchers into Ukraine. And so if you look at the picture here, if you're watching the video, you could see the launcher, and this is the cartel member, and he was spotted in a city near Texas carrying this launcher, and it looks thinner than the Javelin, and people online and military experts are saying it looks more like an AT-4, which is a Swedish-made anti-tank system. The U.S. military also uses them and has also shipped a lot of them to Ukraine. A lot of other countries use them as well, and they are cheaper than the Javelin. But it's certainly possible that just with the lack of oversight, that somehow this did end up there from weapons that the U.S. has sent Ukraine. The Mexican TV report said that there were Javelin anti-tank missiles being sold on the black market for between $40,000 and $60,000. So it sounds like they are out there. And since the U.S. and its allies began flooding Ukraine with weapons, there have been multiple reports of arms winding up in other countries. Nigeria's president said last year that terrorists in the Lake Chad region of Africa were armed with weapons from Ukraine. It got very little attention that the president of Nigeria said that. In October 2022, Finland's National Law Enforcement Agency, the National Bureau of Investigation, warned that arms meant for Ukraine had wound up in the hands of criminal gangs in Finland, and also said that weapons meant for Ukraine were winding up in Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands. So again, we know, there is a lack of oversight when it comes to these weapons. So it's not a surprise to hear that they might be turning up in other countries and are on the black market. All right, the next one here: FBI reopens a probe into Julian Assange. So the FBI has restarted its investigation into WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and this was according to a front page story from the Sydney Morning Herald, which is the big newspaper in Australia. So according to a front page story, the FBI is looking to build its case up against Assange, who was indicted by the U.S. Justice Department in 2019 for exposing U.S. war crimes by publishing classified documents that he obtained from a source, which is a standard journalistic practice. So he's being indicted for doing journalism and revealing things the U.S. didn't want revealed. So the report said that last week, the FBI contacted Andrew O'Hagan, who is a Scottish novelist. He worked as Assange's ghostwriter for an autobiography. And he rejected the FBI request as he opposes the U.S.'s efforts to imprison Assange for his journalism. O'Hagan said, quote, "I would not give a witness statement against a fellow journalist being pursued for telling the truth. I would happily go to jail before agreeing in any way to support the American security establishment in this cynical effort," end quote. Assange's legal team was surprised by the FBI request, which came amid building pressure on the Biden administration to drop the charges against the WikiLeaks founder. A delegation of Australian lawmakers recently met with the U.S. ambassador to Australia to pressure her, to pressure the Biden administration to drop the charges. So Assange's Australian lawyer is saying, this is kind of strange. There's a lot of concern because they are working to try to secure an arrangement that would see Assange be able to go home, and they're worried that they might be trying to gather more evidence to help. It would be very unusual if the FBI was trying to gather evidence that could help clear his name. Assange's brother Gabriel Shipton said it appears that the U.S. might be seeking a new indictment against Assange, and that it showed an acknowledgement of how weak the charges are against him. So just not a good sign, because there is this growing pressure from Australia, from some members of Congress, a few, but still it's significant because they've been silent all this time. It's just not good to see that the FBI is poking around about him again. All right, the next one here: U.S. and Taiwan sign a trade agreement under a new initiative angering China. So, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative announced Thursday that the U.S. and Taiwan signed the first trade agreement under a new economic initiative that was launched last year. The deal was signed in Washington by representatives of the U.S. and Taiwan's respective de facto embassies. So the agreement has angered China as Beijing opposes any official cooperation between the US and Taiwan. So this deal was signed between the de facto embassies, but it was negotiated between US trade representative officials and Taiwanese trade officials. And it's a deal between the US and Taiwanese government. It's very clearly that's what it is. And it covers trade facilitation, regulatory practices, anti-corruption efforts, and small and medium-sized enterprises. So Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said, quote, China firmly opposes official interaction of any form between China's Taiwan region and countries that have diplomatic relations with China. That includes negotiating or signing any agreement of sovereign implication or official nature, end quote. She called on the U.S. to stop any official interaction with Taiwan. So as I cover a lot, the U.S. has been increasing military and diplomatic support for Taiwan in recent years, and China views these steps as a violation of the U.S.'s One China policy. So also on Thursday, China's defense minister Li Shangfu issued a warning to the U.S. and the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the independence-minded ruling party in Taipei. According to a Chinese military spokesman, Li said that China will continue to push for a peaceful reunification. That's their primary goal. But he added, quote, Beijing will never tolerate any attempt by the Democratic Progressive Party authorities to seek foreign support for Taiwanese independence, nor will we tolerate any attempt by external forces to use Taiwan to contain China. We will absolutely not promise to renounce the use of force, end quote. Some more warnings from China that the U.S. is probably going to ignore. All right, the next one here. This is from Middle East Eye. The U.S. announces its first round of sanctions on Sudan. So the United States has announced its first round of sanctions on Sudan after the Sudanese army pulled out of ceasefire talks in Jeddah. 4 companies have been sanctioned by the U.S. 2 are connected to the army, and 2 are connected to its enemy, the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary. So they sanctioned both sides. The White House released a statement on Thursday saying that it was responding to the ongoing violence in Sudan by levying economic sanctions, imposing visa restrictions, and releasing an updated business advisory on Sudan. The U.S. government said that the measures are intended to hold those accountable for undermining peace. So American sources told Middle East Eye that no individuals have been sanctioned. Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who's the head of the RSF, known as Hameti, he has not been sanctioned individually, the source said. So they say that there's visa restrictions, but it's not clear who they are, who they've been imposed on. So first action by the U.S. Biden signed an executive order a few weeks ago to give himself the power to impose these sanctions, and we might see more fighting still going on. There were ceasefire talks going on in Saudi Arabia. Some ceasefires have held for a very short amount of time, but for the most part, it seems like the violence has still been going on in Sudan. All right. The last one here, Iran resolves 2 of the IAEA's concerns, and this is from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute. So Iran has put to bed at least 2 of the UN nuclear watchdog's outstanding inquiries over one of the 3 so-called undeclared sites where trace particles of unprocessed uranium had been found previously, and they also resolved an issue with some recently discovered highly enriched uranium particles. So the IAEA and Iran have been cooperating very closely lately on these issues. So one of them was that the IAEA found uranium particles that were enriched at 83.7%, which is higher than anything Iran has declared. It's still, slightly lower than the 90% needed for weapons grade. The highest that Iran is enriching at is 60%. So this was found apparently. But the IAEA is satisfied now that they believe it was just a byproduct. It was not intentionally enriched to that level. And then the other issue is this traces of uranium at 3 undeclared nuclear sites. This has been an issue for a while, and it's not really clear what the deal is. So there's 3 sites where this happened, and one of them apparently the IAEA is satisfied with now, so they closed it down. And this was never any sort of proliferation risk, but it's always been kind of an issue that the U.S. and Israel have kind of thrown in Iran's face. And the IAEA is very politicized when it comes to Iran, making them look bad, and they leak things to the media. So it's just been this kind of outstanding issue that doesn't, again, it's not really it doesn't mean that Iran was trying to make a bomb. It's just kind of this little technical thing, I guess, that they found these traces of uranium. So they're moving along, which is good. I'm pretty pessimistic about the idea of the U.S. and Iran reaching some kind of deal. Although there was that report that the U.S. was talking to Oman about potentially mediating something, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that because the Biden administration has been very hard line on Iran. But that is it for the news. That's everything for the week for me. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Ted Snyder. When Spain sounds like France and France sounds like China. One from Andrew Basevich, The Compulsion to Intervene. One from Thomas Edelman, Jack Teixeira, The Deep State and Captured Media. We have one that's over at the Libertarian Institute. We have one from Roger Thompson, Tonight's Movie at 90 Seconds to Midnight, Failsafe, about the movie about potential nuclear war. And then the spotlight is from Chris Hedges over at SheerPost, The Democratic Party's Crucifixion of Matt Taibbi. But that's everything. That was, again, it's been a pretty busy week. That was a ton of stuff that I just covered. So, yeah, I'm going to enjoy my weekend and try not to think about this stuff too much. But you could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Share the show. I've also been putting it on Twitter. Just because that might become a more viable video platform whenever Tucker starts his show over there. So I figured I would just make it a habit. So yeah, help us out, support us, share the show, tell people about antiwar.com. I will be back after this weekend. Thanks for listening.